Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So, I'm glad that there's been good discussion about this resolution. I do think there should be some changes to the whereas clauses, and I'm glad that's being discussed. The important part of the resolution is that it requires people to, it encourages people to make sure that we uphold our constitutional values and that people do not suppress citizens' rights, and that unconstitutional or illegal orders are not followed. And I just want to talk a little about the issue of military people under orders, which was brought up in earlier testimony. It's true. Normally, you do not have military sent out to deal with protests, but it has happened before. There have been one case that comes to mind, if I remember correctly, was General Douglas MacArthur was sent out to disperse a protest by veterans, the bonus army in the Great Depression. And even though General Douglas MacArthur was an active duty officer, he was actually tasked with doing that, even though in theory that should be something that's, where dealing with the protest should be done by police or maybe the National Guard. I don't think they should be dispersing protests, but the president at the time did send an active duty general, General MacArthur, to do that. So it does happen occasionally. I think it's good that we have laws like posse comitatus, but these laws are not always followed. The context in which I see this resolution is the same context as what happened during Watergate. During Watergate, President Nixon's secretary, when President Nixon was close to being impeached, Nixon's Secretary of Defense issued a memorandum to those under his charge and said, please remember, illegal orders by the president should not be followed. And that was one, I don't know whether that was really necessary or not. I don't know whether Nixon would have made any legal orders to stay in power, but it was good and prudent that he did that because it made sure that our nation was able to get through that crisis without a collapse of constitutional norms. So it's important to make those kind of reminders from time to time. And that's what this resolution does. It does say that illegal and unconstitutional orders should not be followed. And I agree that military members of the military should be treated on a par with civilians, but I do think it's important for members of the military, as well as others, to be reminded about that their paramount duty is to the Constitution, to protect the rights of citizens, and to make sure that that the principles of our society are not disrupted by suppression of people's rights. So it's I know that similar resolutions have been proposed in the Obama administration by Obama's critics, and there are certainly some concerns that that Democrats tend to have, and some concerns that Republicans tend to have. But I think no matter who's making the criticism and which administration is in power, it's very important to issue these reminders to people serving in government that their paramount duty is to the citizens and not to follow orders that would lead to the destruction of our Constitution and our rights. I do want to say one thing to defend part of the whereas clause. When I mentioned the Emoluments Clause, emoluments in the Constitution doesn't mean gifts. Emoluments covers any kind of payments by foreign governments to not only the president, but any federal official. That's what's prohibited by the Constitution. And unfortunately, the Constitution is not very good in providing enforcement mechanisms, just because it doesn't really operate at that level. But the emollient, I think that's as close as things get to an open and shut case. The Emoluments Clause is being violated. And I I'm sure that President Trump is not the first president to be blatantly violating the Constitution, but it is something that's concerning. President Trump did say, did talk about how this so-called judge was subject to a conflict of interest because of his ancestry. That wasn't the campaign, but it's still concerning, and some of his more recent statements are concerning as well. And again, I would have wanted I would support this kind of resolution as a useful reminder, no matter who is president, but I think it's particularly needed now. So I think that this resolution is worth supporting, and if it's not passed this year, then I think we need to come back and look at it in next year's session, because certainly if President Trump continues on the course he's on. So thank you, and I support this resolution.
If he's still president.
Yeah. Well, you know, you see people who seem to be in the re-elect Pence crowd, like Senator McCain or Graham, but my bet is he's still president at least in 2018 for what's